Okay, let me just put this in a context for you. What we've done this year with the Child Protection Panel is bring together some serious experts, because what we wanted to do is to use the opportunity of WTM to gather the best advice we could from the agencies about how the tourism industry could work with them to enhance the levels of child protection offered around the world. So our focus is not so much on the issue of child protection or why it arises, but it's much more on what can the travel and tourism industry do to address these issues, and that's why you've got the kind of panel you have. Although, as I said to John, I am depressed by the small number of people in the room. All I can say is, over the last 3 or 4 years, we have increased the number of people in the room slowly each year. So we are making slow progress. And what I'd say to the speakers, who I know many of you have given up valuable time to be here, is that this session is being videoed. Everything you say is on the record, and we will be using it at other world travel markets around the world to promote the importance of child protection. So you're not just speaking to the people in the room, but you're speaking to, we hope, a much larger audience. If that's any consolation for the small audience. But thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to John, who will chair this session. Who's going to go first, John?
I think Ashley has agreed that he will go first, and so.
Well done, Ashley.
Very much. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. It's my privilege to moderate this session. Well, Ashley moves his way to the podium. I think Harold's right about the difference in numbers, isn't it? I think there's a ratio of the people who are interested in furry animals are twice as many as the people interested in child protection. So there still is a lot of work to be done. But as Harold says, it's a lot bigger number than last year and the year before. So it's reason for optimism. Very grateful to Ashley, who, despite a few technical problems we've been having and so on, has stepped into the breach to start off. He's a senior officer from the Border Force. We're looking forward to hearing you. Thank you, Ashley.
Hi, hello folks, and good morning. I was hoping someone else would sort of set the direction. It's the first event I've ever been to, and I thought I could then follow in. So hopefully I'll still hit the right line. If not, you can quiz me later. I'm Ashley Robinson. I'm an assistant director with Border Force at Heathrow Airport. And one of the things I lead on is our safeguarding and trafficking strategy. And I'm going to tell you a little bit around some of the challenges there at the border, things that we're doing differently today that we weren't doing in the past, and certainly some of that ambition to get really good at this. Because there's a big risk and there's a big threat, both inbound and outbound, and people are trading in misery. We've developed a safeguarding and trafficking network at Heathrow, which then became the blueprint for the rest of the country. And what we wanted to do is that in that grand scheme of protecting the UK border, the stopping the bad things and bad people, the opportunity to see the border as a unique zone when it came to both law enforcement, but in particular safeguarding was there. And ring fencing, specialising, really investing in training to make sure we have this network of officers that are always available on the front line in every terminal. Really important. We trained everybody, every frontline officer, to understand safeguarding. They're obligated and wanted to understand the law and also to combat the trafficking. But you can't have a master of all trades. So using a triage system, we can then bring in the experts. And quite simply, we want to stop all known victims of trafficking from being moved across the border at Heathrow. We want to maximise the opportunity to detect our unknown or our potential victims of trafficking, and to identify and safeguard children at risk of harm travelling to and from the UK, sending a clear message that crime against children will not be tolerated. And in simple terms, what we want to be able to do is we want to send out a couple of different messages. You know, I want criminals having crisis meetings about coming into the UK, trading in modern-day slavery. To really combat that criminality behind it, we need to get very good at detecting the sophisticated, the serious, the organised criminals behind this. But we want to get a message out to victims, both potential victims and actual victims, that actually the UK border is a safe place. And we have a lot of potential to get that relationship of trust right. Some people won't necessarily see themselves as a victim at the border. In fact, particularly from an exploitation point of view, they might think this is the next best chapter of their life. Equally, they could be terrified, either because psychological, physical violence has intimidated to the point that they can't ask for that help. So putting a message out there as a beacon to victims that the UK border is a safe place, you can ask for help at the UK border. And the other part is that reassurance. It's dealing with the public. It's giving a raised awareness. And it's also tackling some of those taboo subjects. Talking about things like female genital mutilation. And actually saying to parents, this is child abuse, plain and simple. We're not going to be afraid to tackle any of the cultural issues there. We're going to communicate in plain English and raise that awareness. But a more complex safeguarding focus is going to require more probing questions. And actually, we are intelligence-led, but we've got this ambition to be really good at being intelligence-led and understanding about who are bringing in children or victims, where our risks and our threats are. But if we don't have the specific details of where somebody might be coming from with a miracle baby, or outbound where they're going to take a young child out for female genital mutilation, or some of our young children being radicalised by extremists and taken out to exotic places. If we don't know that specific time, date, flight, and bearing in mind Heathrow Airport, 74 million arriving and departing passengers every year, then our profile needs to grow. That means more probing questions, and we do want to facilitate lawful people, their goods and their freight, but we're going to need to ask questions. And some of those simple things can become frustrating. And if we're trying to balance border security, passenger experience, making sure that we're not talking to every parent that's bringing home their child that happens to be travelling in a different name to them, they don't have the birth certificate, ruining their passenger experience while we're looking for that needle in the haystack, getting that balance is one of the challenges. But we're getting better at it. We're investing in the training, and our staff are better trained, better equipped, and better guided than they've ever been before. And the other part of what we're trying to do is to expand that network. With the 74 million arriving and departing passengers, we have something like 100,000 members of staff that work at the airport, all doing different jobs on top of those people working at the border. And if we can get everybody thinking around safeguarding, around what a victim looks like or a potential victim might look like, then we can build that network of eyes and ears. We can have a triage system, a single point of contact that anyone with concerns that sees warnings or danger signs can refer. And that's going to hopefully make the biggest difference, is everyone working together, understanding what modern day slavery looks like, understanding that it's going to be hidden in plain sight and there could be victims amongst those groups. So the border's busy, the challenge is on. We're trying to maintain a good passenger experience. We want to promote national prosperity. We want to stop all victims from crossing the border. We want to be able to intercept and intervene them. So embedding seeds with officers and extra members of the public, talking to them, raising that awareness. And that's one of my, I suppose, requests to the industry is if everybody thinks just a one indicator, if everyone's looking at potential warning or danger signs, then perhaps we can refer more potential victims. Simple things like, does that person act as if they're instructed by another? There could be some control over their movement. Or are they lacking in self-esteem? Or do they seem anxious with an expression of fear? And while that could be a warning or danger sign, that could be a bored teenager that's just not engaged, that's been on a long-haul flight. So again, understanding the differences. Is there any evidence to suggest deception or coercion may be taking place? Again, some of the people we see being moved across the border, they may have a good idea about what's about to happen to them. And certainly with older children, they may even be coming to know they're going to be treated like a slave, exploited. But they might compare that to where they've just come from as a better opportunity. Are they bonded by some sort of debt, or is money going to be deducted from their salary? And what we're saying to people is we don't expect everybody on the front line, we don't expect everybody in the industry to recognise a victim of trafficking. But if you've got one or two maybe indicators, warning or danger signs, then refer it. Stop what's going on and get someone else to come in and have that conversation. Look for that potential victim of trafficking. And with children, we go one step further. So the whole aspect of asking for help and consent very much exists with adults. With children, we say, if we've got reasonable grounds to suspect you're about to become a victim or you're about to be exploited or you are being exploited, we take that consent away from the child and say, we're going to refer you as a potential victim anyway. It's a real step change. And as we start at the border to think about that victim focus, then that drives us. So we're now thinking victim first, offender second. And I will finish at that point. I think we're going to be asked questions at the panel afterwards. But hopefully I've given you just a little insight into the work that Border Force is doing differently. We've got a much bigger ambition, and that is building big relationships with all of you, knowing what more we can do to maximise that opportunity. Thank you.
So I thank Ashley on your behalf and so on for giving up valuable time to come and join us, much appreciated and so on. So next we have Lou Hunt, who is Operations Manager with the National Crime Agency, and he's going to make the next presentation. So we've got slightly more speakers than we'd normally have in this session, so we're going to try and be quite sharp on the time, so there's some time for questions at the end. Thank you. Welcome, Fran.
Harold, have we got this? More technical issues, I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen. I think actually it's worth mentioning. I'm Lou Hunt from the National Crime Agency, and my job is lead officer in relation to the tracker team. I also cover victim identification, peer-to-peer, and also a team called evidential development and digital exploitation. Obviously, I'm going to talk to you this morning around transnational child sex offenders. And actually, it was really worthwhile following on. It's actually a right flow in relation to follow on from Ashley, who was talking about work at the border. Within the tracker team, transnational child sex offending is a National Crime Agency key threat. And within the tracker team, we actually proactively develop intelligence on 4 categories of TCSOs. These are UK nationals who's been suspected or known to have sexually abused children overseas. And let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, paedophiles, hebephiles, they will travel to abuse children anywhere in the world. UK nationals who have been arrested or convicted overseas of child sex offences. And recently, we had a person who was returned from the Philippines for serious offences that occurred there. We've also covered non-UK nationals convicted of child sex offences overseas who actually enter the UK. This happens on a regular basis. But also we're responsible for missing registered sex offenders. Now these are people that actually been put on the sex offender register or actually decided to then go abroad and actually try and actually get out of actually being registered. Within the tracker team, we also have a part that's international, and that's actually following on from what Ashley was talking about. This is cited within the National Crime Agency Border Policing Command, and we have a single point of contact for international child sex offending cases, and we have close liaison with our National Crime Agency international liaison officers. Now, there's key destination countries that we look at, and they're all known to you, but I'll go through them now. Southeast Asia in particular, Cambodia, Laos, Philippines, Vietnam and Thailand. And then look at the Indian subcontinent. Just travelled over on the actual cable car, and it was advertising Sri Lanka as well. So then you've got Africa. Key areas around Africa is now Kenya, Mozambique and Niger as well. But also within Europe, Romania particularly is a country that comes to notice a lot. Ukraine now, and also Spain. But also within South and Latin America, Peru, Mexico and Venezuela. Well, what happens is when countries actually put a robust response to child protection, what happens is there's displacement. And we've seen this certainly within Southeast Asia, where Thailand has actually carried out some really proactive work, and that's actually displaced to places like Cambodia and Vietnam. Well, what are the push and pull factors? As I said, offenders will target countries where children are. or perceived to be more vulnerable. And like I said right at the start, paedophiles, hebephiles, they will travel anywhere to abuse children. They target countries with low socio-economic conditions, particularly where there's low ages of consent or where their child protection and legislation framework is not as developed as those in the UK or Western world. There's some areas that have no sexual offences legislation whatsoever, and particularly paedophiles will look around areas where there's no extradition treaty in place. The factors that also are, as travel being easy and cheap, make some countries particularly appealing for such offenders. And then also, as I said earlier, offenders will travel overseas to actually avoid our stringent sex offender management regime and the sex offender register that is in place within the UK. What about victim access? Well, TCSOs, and I said this and will continue to say this, they look to engage with children in whatever possible sphere they can. And that's orphanages, seen recently the pilot that was convicted out in Kenya, schools, charities, NGOs as well, but they'll look to contact with street children and around those local establishments such as bars, and they'll build relationships with families, particularly where people have got lots of money, Western people with lots of money, and will use that money to corrupt families. And that grooming cycle will take place, the buying of gifts, actually even to the extent of providing schooling as well for the children, and also taking the children on holidays as well. We've seen all that type of behaviour before. We also receive specific intelligence, and it's important that actually the travel industry, and I'll come on to that in a further slide, actually report this to us. We've had recently specific intelligence around a guest house in Phnom Penh, and it's been used by foreign child sex offenders visiting Cambodia. Now, the guest house actually has been known to allow the children to actually enter the premises and the bedrooms with foreign guests. So quite open what is happening within that establishment. There's no issue or any challenge, because quite simply, there's no rules applied and they don't have any child protection policies in place. This is the type of behaviour that we need to stop. Where are intelligence gaps? We want to know what hotspots there are within certain countries. Which regions do these TCSOs get identified in? Are there common or known hotels used by these people and used for child sexual exploitation offending? And particularly, even to the extent of knowing bars, clubs, cafes that are frequented by these transnational child sexual offenders and used for child sexual exploitation offending. We've seen some successful campaigns, and one recently was with law enforcement as well, and that was around the Brazil World Cup, and the aim was to actually address the issues of children being sexually exploited, and It's a Penalty campaign was very successful. Its deterrence campaign to actually raise awareness of child sexual exploitation in Brazil, and it actually used social media, television, radio, and also there was an in-flight video on BA flights to Brazil. But what it also did, we have a powerful piece of legislation within the UK, and that's Section 72 of the Sexual Offences Act. And that gives us the ability to actually prosecute UK nationals who commit child sexual offences overseas, actually in the UK. So they may think they're perfectly safe when they go and abuse abroad, get them back. We can actually, if we've got the evidence, actually convict them within the UK. So our findings are there's links between child sexual exploitation within the It's a Penalty campaign and abuse at major sporting events actually still remains unclear. But vulnerabilities in host countries are exploited by travellers. But it's actually that penalty campaign gained lots of social media interest, but it was actually difficult to quantify its success. What actually can the travel industry do? Well, one of the things is that you can contact us and report. That's most important. Report your suspicions of child sexual exploitation, or actually just suspicious behaviour by adults with children. You should notify law enforcement in that country as soon as possible. What we require is a full name, date of birth, and the date stayed. Again, bringing into that context of what I just said around section 72. Contact details, particularly around addresses, forwarding addresses, phone numbers, and emails as well. But also the children's details, and possibly even the credit card expenditure that has been made by that person. What we want to do is actually work with you and develop and promote child protection and safeguarding policies. And Ashley already sort of pointed that out. We've got to work in partnership here. We can't do it alone. Law enforcement will not solve this problem alone. We need your help. We need to share intelligence regarding child sexual exploitation and TCSO activity actually occurring overseas, and even go to the extent of providing contact details for travel agents or hotels who might hold information on subjects of interest, particularly to us within CEOP. But also provide strategic intelligence, particularly around, say, hotels, but also on the analysis of the actual global picture of child sexual exploitation that's occurring in travel and tourism. And I'll leave the questions to the end. Hopefully I've kept to the 8 minutes.
Absolutely perfect.
Thank you.
Very much indeed. Thank you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, on your programme you will have Beth. You haven't got Beth, but what you have got is Francis West, who's also from, excuse me, my voice is going, who's also from UNICEF UK, from Corporate Social Responsibility. So welcome, Francis, and apologies for my botched introduction due to my throat. Many apologies.
Which one are you giving?
Okay, so my name is Francis West, and I'm the head of private sector policy and advocacy at UNICEF UK. Now, we've been asked to discuss child labour, child sexual exploitation, and risks relating to orphanages, and then what the industry can do to address these challenges. Now, I think the first thing to say is that these child protection issues are frequently linked to each other. For instance, children who are sexually exploited are often trafficked, subject to child labour and other forms of violence. And that's why UNICEF works to strengthen child protection systems and promote positive social norms to prevent and respond to violence against children. So in terms of the tourism industry, while significant efforts have been made to shine a spotlight on the issue of child sexual exploitation, we do need to widen the net to address child labour in the round and working conditions for adults themselves, if these destinations that we all enjoy can truly be considered family friendly. So in order to understand how these risks relate to individual businesses and supply chains, we think more companies in the sector could follow the example of Kioni, who've undertaken and published human rights impact assessments in both Kenya and India. The Starwood Foundation, with the support of UNICEF, has just undertaken a similar assessment in Latin America to understand what the actual and potential human and child rights risks and opportunities at an industry level are, and they'll be releasing a report for the sector at the start of next year. So what's critical with these types of impact assessments is that they include careful consultation with affected and vulnerable groups, such as children. And in so doing, they can help offer a better picture of some of these problems that are so often hidden in plain sight. So diving into some of these issues in a bit more depth, firstly, child labour. Now, of course, there is work that children can do to help their families in ways that are neither harmful nor exploitative. But many children are stuck in unacceptable work that undermines their safety as well as their rights to education and health. And jobs in the informal sector can leave children unsupervised, in unsuitable work, and at great risk due to their exposure to unknown adults, often in alcohol-fueled environments. So what can businesses do? Well, challenging local authorities to put in place better child protection systems to address these instances is in the interests of business. So many restaurants and hotels see that clients and guests return to destinations that they feel are safe and where instances of child exploitation are not apparent. Just moved ahead there. Now, the power of businesses to advocate towards government is huge. And to take an example from another sector, global retail brands such as H&M lobbied the Cambodian government to secure a rise in minimum wage for garment sector workers. Now, if you think about the collective voice of the tourism industry in a destination and the impact that could have on enhancing child protection systems. Another action that businesses could take, I think more could be done to encourage appropriate work for those able to work under the age of 18. So the greatest positive impact of the tourism sector is employment generation. But in a bid to avoid the risk of child labour, some companies have squeezed out employment opportunities for those youths that actually could benefit the most. And I think what businesses need is a clear list from government of the jobs that can and can't be done in the tourism value chain by under 18s. And finally, I think the creation of decent work for adults can address some of the dynamics that facilitate child labour. So tourism's a fantastic job creator, we know that, but while salaries might be above the country's minimum requirements or indeed the industry average, they often do not constitute a living wage, and this can create particularly acute problems for the children of employees in tourism destinations where rising material, housing and food costs are a common result of increased tourist activity. And in some cases, this does contribute to children looking for ways to support family income. So child sexual exploitation, obviously we need to be clear about this. The travel and tourism industry is not the cause of child sexual exploitation in destinations, but it can contribute to the problem and its solution. Sexual abuse and exploitation is definitely not inevitable and it can be prevented, and tourism professionals are in key positions to intervene by protecting children and reporting cases. Now, a successful example of such a campaign is La Muralla Soy Yo, which is, or I Am the Wall in Cartagena, Colombia. And key to the success of that awareness-raising campaign was the involvement of informal workers. So UNICEF worked with Catelco, which is Colombia's hotel association, and ECPAT. We trained more than 70 police officers, informal tourism operators, taxi drivers, over 3,000 hotel staff to identify children at risk. 600 children from vulnerable neighbourhoods were trained on their rights. And one of the impacts of this was an increase in the reporting of cases of commercial sexual exploitation of children to the Colombian justice system by over 80 cases. There is, however, another area where the industry could reduce the risk of child exploitation. So between 60 and 70% of workers in the hotels, catering and tourism sector are women. In many countries, childcare responsibilities conventionally rest with women. And we know that hotels, bars and restaurants are notorious for hours worked, and both front and back of house staff often do have to work double shifts. With schools finishing in the afternoon and parents working until the early hours of the morning, who's looking after their children? And the reality is that they're often left unattended in tourism zones which expose children to high risk of trafficking and exploitation. So a more flexible approach to working hours for young mums could be one way to address this, as well as ensuring that appropriate cover is in place so that employees don't have to work longer hours without prior warning. And alongside this, adequate daycare and after-school activities that keep children off the streets could again be the objective of the industry's advocacy towards government, or indeed could be funded by businesses themselves. So just quickly to round up on orphanage tourism. Orphanages do separate families, as most children actually have living parents. So to take one example, prior to the earthquake in Nepal earlier this year, 16,000 children resided at orphanages. An estimate of about 85% of those children actually had a living parent. And in the 2 months after the earthquake in Kathmandu, at least 245 children were intercepted from being trafficked and unnecessarily or illegally placed in children's care homes. So in some cases, children are deliberately separated from their families and placed in orphanages so they can be used to attract fee-paying volunteers and donors. What's more, whilst orphanage volunteers are generally well-intentioned, they often don't realise that they could inadvertently cause harm to children. So volunteering for short periods of time without appropriate skills and training could contribute to a repeated sense of abandonment felt by already vulnerable children. And in addition, background checks are often not conducted on volunteers. That can increase the risk to children of child sexual exploitation. So by volunteering at orphanages, the institutionalisation of children is inadvertently being supported, and our position is that we would ask those wanting to volunteer with children that aren't qualified professionals to reconsider. Just coming back to Nepal, one area in the aftermath of the earthquake that we did work with the industry was to speak to 25 airline companies operating in Nepal, make them aware of the need to screen passengers to ensure that children are accompanied by their legal caregivers. Thanks.
And our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is Rebecca Smith, who's from Save the Children.
So I think that follows quite nicely now. My name is Rebecca Smith, and I'm from Save the Children, but today I'm going to be talking about an initiative called Better Volunteering, Better Care. Last year, the head of child protection at Save the Children came and presented and talked a lot about the problems with orphanages and orphan volunteering. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about what we can do together to promote ethical volunteering. Okay. We're not alone in this. The government of Cambodia has also looked to call for stop facilitating volunteer placements in residential care facilities. UNICEF and its collaborators urged those wanting to volunteer with children that are not qualified professionals to reconsider. And Francis talked a little bit about some of the reasons why. In terms of, I think we need to stop talking about good orphanages and bad orphanages, because I think the truth of the matter is that all are part of the problem. And the reasons are really twofold. One is that the demands for orphanage placements are increasing the number of orphans and children separated from their families. Like my colleague said, the majority of children in orphanages have family members that they could be living with. And the second is that international volunteering really increases the risk of children being exposed to, it's giving volunteers access to children who are extremely vulnerable, thus increasing their risk. And, you know, as a child, when a baby is born, the brain is still developing. And the way that those neurons are forming, especially under the age of 3, is allowing us to learn how to speak. It's making us learn how to trust people. It's making us learn how to understand the world around us. And especially, you cannot get that level of support in a large-scale orphanage. This is one of the reasons why we say that children under the age of 3 should not be placed in an orphanage. A long-term study in Romania found that every 3 months a child's in a child care institution, they lose a year of development. And that's compared with children in foster care, not compared with children in a family. So what are we talking about? We're talking about really looking at trying to reduce the way that residential care is used, and also really looking at other options, family-based options for children under the age of 3, just because that's when the child is developing so quickly and where the impact is so great. The other thing that we're saying is that poverty shouldn't be a reason why children are separated from their families. Around the world, the extended family takes care of a child who cannot be cared for by his mother or father, and putting up orphanages is a way to create orphans. It doesn't mean that these children have no one. It means that these children now have a better, shiny place to go, with parents thinking maybe this child can have access to education or other things. So we started this initiative with the Better Care Network, Save the Children, and the Better Care Network started saying, we've done all of these costings, we've gone to the governments, we've been campaigning on this issue for a long period of time. We've said, you know what, orphanages are expensive, it's cheaper to support children and their families, and governments say, yeah, but we're not funding the orphanages. That's not our money. We're not shifting money from one place to another. It is fueled by a lot of well-intentioned people who want to help. So we started saying, wait a second, as child protection actors, better volunteering, better care, we started bringing together child protection actors to say, what can we do about this issue? And then we realized we're talking to ourselves, and the people we really need to be engaging with is the volunteer sector, and the tourism sector, and the faith-based community, and that we really need to expand because we can't do this together, and I think there are a lot of well-meaning people out there that want to do ethical volunteering, and we need to work together. We understand the child protection concerns, but we don't understand the market. We don't understand all of the things that the tourism industry comes with it. So we've expanded. 2015, this is just a little bit of a highlight of the people that we've been working with. We now have 80 members across numerous different countries. We're working with a lot of tourism and travel companies. We have 3 goals. One is to raise awareness about the risk of international volunteering in residential care centers. I say residential care centers because it includes quite a few places, and also I don't like to say orphanage because these children aren't orphans. The second is that we want to create behavior change so that when people are looking for a product, for a volunteer product, they are making educated choices. Just the same way that we look for fair trade, that we understand all of these different ethical options that are out there. We want students, we want volunteers, we want people who are called to travel to be educated about the decisions that they're making. And we also want to help the industry make ethical options available. We can't do this on our own, so we're really hoping to engage with tourism organizations to say, what is it? What is the kind of thing that you need to do, and how can we, with our child protection knowledge, help to work together? These are some of our member initiatives. We have Last Minute Orphanage, The Voluntourist, and then we have several volunteer working groups that have happened both in Australia. The Australian working group is just forming, but it's really looking at faith-based organizations and mission trips and looking at how do we educate churches about more ethical options. And then a working group in Nepal specifically looking at volunteering within the Nepal. We do a lot of advocacy through webinars and conferences, and we're looking to work together. We don't have the options on our own, and we don't think the tour companies have the options as well, so it's how do we bring these people together? So we do have some questions here. One is, how can the child protection community really best support travel providers in understanding best practice in child safeguarding? And how can we support travel providers to move away from residential care centers to ensure that children are not put at risk and our positive community partnerships are maintained? We would like to work in partnerships, so we have a website, we have an email address, and we would really encourage all of you that are interested to get involved. Thank you.
And our final speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is Emmanuel Werner, who's from Friends International.
Escape. I'm used to Mac.
It'll work. There we go.
And slideshow, Slack. Okay. Okay, hi everybody. My name is Emmanuel Werner, and I'm the Europe coordinator for Friends International. So, since I'm coming at the end, I'd like to talk about how child protection specialists and the tourism industry can work together to actually protect children from all forms of abuse. We've heard about sex offenders and trafficking and orphanage voluntarism, but actually I think that we should try to protect children from all forms of abuse. And I also think that we, as tourists and travelers, we all have a responsibility to protect children when we travel. And we have to ensure that our behaviors, at least, don't have a negative impact on the lives of children. So I'd like to talk to you today about the Child Safe movement and how, through the Child Safe movement, we've been engaging with the tourism industry. The Child Safe movement is a global movement that empowers everyone to protect children, both the local communities and the international community. It was established 10 years ago by Friends International, and it's operational in departure countries such as Switzerland, France, Germany, the UK, and in arrival countries such as Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and Indonesia. So basically, there's two components of the Child Safe movement. One is Child Safe community. We are, in the countries where we are working, we are building the capacity of the people to protect their own children. So basically, we are going into marginalized communities, and we are identifying people, key people, and training them on how to recognize a situation of abuse or danger and how to respond to it. So it can be tuk-tuk drivers, it can be street sellers, it can be village chief, parents, teachers, anyone who's interested in protecting children and who's committed. And we are training them and then certifying them, and they become the ears and the eyes of the child protection movement. But we're also engaging with local businesses. So we're training staff of hotels and restaurants and internet cafes, just to avoid the situation that my colleague mentioned about this guest house in Cambodia, allowing for customers to come in with kids. And I just want to mention that it's not just a one-off training and there you go. We train those members and we monitor them. And we try to keep them engaged. And then there's the international community component. So we've developed, what we've seen in the countries that we're working in is that it's highly touristic countries, and tourists are coming in and they are touched by the situation of the children. They want to help, and they do have good intentions. I think every one of us has experienced this situation where you're at a crossroads traveling, and there's this begging child coming to you, and he's asking for money. What do? It's maybe not the best way to help, but still you want to help. So we've all lived this kind of situation, and this is why the Child Safe movement has developed 7 tips for travelers to give travelers first information on what they may face as situation, and practical advice on how they can better help, what they can do to really have a positive impact on children. And we address a series of issues. One of our main arguments is that, children are not tourist attractions. So think before, visiting children in orphanages and in schools. But we also talk about volunteering. We talk about, begging children and, sexual exploitation, etc. So those tips for travelers exist in 10 languages. And we're actually going to launch a new version very soon. And based on those tips, we have developed we have turned some of these tips into proper campaigns because we really thought that it deserved some specific attention. So we have launched Think Before Giving Money to Begging Children campaign, and we have launched the Children Are Not Tourist Attraction campaign. And this is another one that we have launched recently. And this is actually quite interesting because in Cambodia you have 20 orphanages are run by the government, and then you have probably between 400 and 500 orphanages that are privately run. It's interesting to see that 100% of those orphanages are funded by foreigners. Very often, people who have, been in the country, they want to help. And the first thing that comes to mind is open a center, because it's tangible, you know where your money is going, and it's just the way that people think that it's the best way to help. So this is why we created this last campaign that is really targeted at donors, and the message is here, stop pouring money in orphanages, but support families, because, as my colleagues mentioned, those kids have families. So in order to spread the word and raise awareness of tourists, we need the tourism industry. We cannot do this on our own, and we really need to work together. Why should the tourism industry care? Because it's good for the business, it's good for children, and it's good for the communities. So there's really two sides, there's two components, there's two ways we can engage with the tourism industry. One is really about promoting the 7 tips. Distribution to the customers, presenting the tips in business space. So, for example, in Geneva, we are engaging with the Geneva airport, and they are distributing the tips. In the airports, we've engaged with airlines, and they are promoting the tips in their in-flight magazines, websites, social media. And then it's really about, especially with travel agencies, it's about promoting businesses, the services of child-safe agents and businesses. So, transport and child-safe certified hotels and guest house and restaurants really promote when you send your clients to travel in those countries, promote those businesses. And then it's also about how the tourism industry can develop, can become child protective and child protective. So, for example, ensure that the products they are selling are not harming children, not promote or sell activities that could potentially harm children, especially orphanage visits, slum visits, and unsupervised activities with children. Make sure that their CSR strategy is not harming children. I've engaged with a travel agency in Geneva who is, for example, supporting orphanages in Nepal. So we've been discussing about ways to engage. Make sure that the communication is not hurting children is another way to engage. So here is a list of child-safe supporters we've engaged with. And this is the impact we've had so far. So in terms of child-safe agents, we have almost 6,000 members. Together, we've been able to protect nearly 5,000 children, and so far, almost 30 million tourists have been exposed to our messages. So our messages here, again, is let's work together, join the movement, and let's make change happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we've had 5 excellent presentations. Can we now open the floor to yourselves, because our speakers have given us lots of time to ask some questions by being very short with their own remarks, which I appreciate as well. So please, ladies and gentlemen, it's over to you. Don't all rush. Gentlemen at the front. I think we're recording everything, so I think if you could just wait for the microphone, I think that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, David Harrison from Middlesex University. Of the law and order agencies, can you give me a rough idea of how many people over the last 3 or 4 years, for example, have actually been prosecuted in the UK for child sex offences overseas? Because my impression is that although the law is actually quite good, it's actually extremely difficult to implement.
Yes, it is a very good piece of legislation, and we have had successes. As to say how many it is, I don't know off the top of my head, but it is. Just recently we had a successful prosecution within Dorset, and this happens on a regular basis. So particularly where now laptops are being found, mobile devices are being found, and images that the paedophiles have taken while they're engaging in sexual acts makes it far easier then to actually convict. So we've had quite a lot of success in relation to that. But as for the number, off the top of my head, I don't know.
Can I just add one thing to that? Not enough, I think, prosecutions. Particularly alarming for me is things like female genital mutilation, when there's been powers probably since the 1970s, and I'm not aware of a single successful prosecution in the UK. One of the problems with that is that the abusers can often be parents. And if we look at FGM, stopping it before it happens is much easier, and I think we're better at that, but we don't know how much we've deterred. Once the abuse has taken place, trying to convince a young child to prosecute their mother or their grandmother that's maybe taken them out for that abuse, it's extremely difficult to build that relationship. So more awareness, make it much harder for people to travel out for abuse is certainly one of the directions we're going in.
Thank you. Can I invite some more questions? Gentleman here, lady there, lady there.
I'm Magar Ramasamy from the World Airlines Club Association. In fact, it's good to know when talk about the tourism, which was tourism and travel as well, and obviously airline is one of the main network that most of the offenders are using. And I don't know how far British Airways, for instance, is involved in helping you to identify the offenders on one side. And I'm glad to hear, for instance, from one of the speakers, Emmanuel. You have 3 airlines already: the Air Asia, Thai International, and the Silk Air.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're trying to do as from the World Airlines Club Association, is to bring the maximum airline to be involved and as well to be responsible as part of the CSR. So maybe from British Airways, I don't know if you can answer that.
Can I just say something?
Yes, sure.
So British Airways are a fantastic partner with us, and I'm pleased to say other people like Virgin Atlantic working with us. But the offer's there. Anyone as an airline that wants to work with Border Force, British government, training, awareness, then there's lots of opportunities for us. We want people to have that appetite to want to learn around education. So put those requests in through your local contacts, and I'm quite happy to share details for Border Force before people leave.
Anybody else want to contribute to that, to answering that particular point? We're finished. Okay, so I think we have a question here, and I think I saw a hand just go up in the. That's right there, and then there, and then there, and we are able to carry on a few minutes longer, ladies and gentlemen. It would be a shame if the clock stopped us talking about these interesting and important things. Yes.
My question's for Rebecca. When you talk about engaging with the travel industry, how do you see that happening?
I think it starts from really trying to figure out who is engaged and how can we get momentum around people who are starting to do things, starting to try different things, and then through contacting the Better Volunteering, Better Care email address that I put as part of my presentation. And really, we're doing a workshop in November. We're trying to get more and more people involved. So it's a starting point. And what I'd hope to see is that we start to talk about what are some of the challenges that we're facing, what are some of the things that we can work on together, and then how can we go forward to sort of make sure that we're all on board as something together. So it's not just signing up and saying, I have to take on all of this at once, but it's kind of saying, these are the things I would like to do better, and I'm struggling with how to do it. How can we work together? And then us developing that together.
Anybody else want to respond? Then we have, I think...
My question kind of links into that. I just wanted to say that I think it'd be fair to say that most of the industry would not like to be contributing to the exploitation of children. So I just wanted to ask why you think that there continues to be this gap between actual action being taken by the industry and the reality of what people seem to think, and the fact that there's not very many people here. I'd just like to ask why you think that gap exists and how you think we can fill it.
I can start, and I'm sure other people can pitch in, but I think a lot of it is people want to do something directly with children, and so the demand is out there. They want to be interacting directly with children, and they don't necessarily have a large skill set to do so. And so it's trying to look at that demand side and see, can we educate people who want to volunteer, because there's always going to be some options out there, and then how do we look at the supply side as well. So I think it's because people want to have direct experiences with children, and there's something very rewarding out of that. What they don't realize is that might be placing a child at greater risk. So I think it's on looking at both sides.
I think maybe other people would like to contribute to that as well, because that's quite a central question.
Yeah, I just want to add to that as well. I mean, I think part of the problem is also that so businesses do have a responsibility to respect human and child's rights, but primary duty bearers for the protection of human rights are states. And so a lot of these problems need to be addressed by governments, which is why I'm trying to make the point that I think business can use their influence on governments so that they will invest in the appropriate systems to protect children. So I think that's one thing businesses can really do.
Just one of the things, definitely there's a big problem with that demand. And I think starting to tackle that, even in the UK alone, we have to ask ourselves, who are these people that want to have sex with children? Where are they? They're in society somewhere. They're someone's family or colleagues. And while addressing that demand and that terrible word about sex tourism, it's also about making sure that people that have a brand or identity to protect don't want to be associated with that problem. So I think your question was quite good, but actually lots of people that I talk to that want to do something don't want their company or their destination suddenly on the map from a point of media saying, there's a problem with child exploitation or trafficking. But I do believe if we get the messaging right, in the same way I said with British Airways, trafficking of children is not a problem just for the UK, and it's certainly not a problem for British Airways, and it's not a problem at Heathrow. It's a worldwide problem. Actually, anyone that steps up and says, I want to do something about this, that's the important message. And if we get that message together out there, then we should reassure the travelling public, not scare them.
Excellent.
I think in relation to that is that Ashley makes a very good point there. The problem is that when you go to an airport, it's a happy, smiley place that you actually want, that you're going off to holiday or you're going off to business, and businesses, quite rightly, don't want to be reminded that there's these awful things taking place. And we should actually be in the process of being able to leaflet, actually sort of speak to people before they board, and particularly, mentioning the awful things like FGM in particular. These are the things, the subjects that we should be talking about, but obviously business is very important, and they don't want that actually sort of to cloud the issue of actually looking at these awful things. So that does happen. And really, we should be more engaging, and we should be actually, all of us should be involved in this to stop this behaviour.
Yeah,
Can I just add this? There is a flip side to that, which is potentially more positive, which is that so consumers in the travel and tourism industry actually go to the destinations and they see the kids selling stuff on the beaches, etc. They are interacting with people that are affected in those tourism destinations. You don't go to Bangladesh and look for your and meet the factory workers that are making your T-shirts and clothes, etc. So I think there is a chance to engage consumers actually on some of these issues, but we've got to be perhaps making the case a bit more publicly on why this, rather than or in an appropriate balance with tackling some of those environmental issues is what we need to do.
Absolutely. Could I invite another question? I think this lady's been waiting quite a long time for her question.
Thank you
just
very
here.
much. My name is Anna Laman. I'm responsible for tourism India. I have an organization from 4 years ago. I think my question has been very helpful for me. Thank you very much. I mean, my question I think is for Manuel and Rebecca. We support a home center shelter from 4 years ago in the rural areas of Rajasthan. They are very good, really very good. But as you say, Rebecca, it's not about good or bad, right? So, in fact, the founder of that organization told me 15 years ago, 90% of the children, they were without parents. Now, it's not like that. More than 90% of the children, they have parents. So, what should we do as a tourism businesses? Should we stop supporting that organization? Should we try to speak with the founder and try to find more initiatives? As you say, that supporting families, not a child. There is already a good initiative for supporting families that we can advise to that organization. That is my question, please.
Yeah, so that's really a good point. Just want to mention that in Cambodia, Friends International is partnering with orphanages to try to turn them into something else, turn them into a center for community that will benefit the community. So we keep the structure and we try to keep the resources, but for another purpose. And it's taking some time, and it's interesting because one of the challenges is actually to talk to donors and funders. And why is that? Because very often they would like to keep their orphanage. They're going to Cambodia once a year. They want to see their kids, and they're bringing presents, etc. So there's a shift, and there's a shift in mentality, and also we have to work on the mistrusts that people place in families, because that's an argument that we keep receiving about. But yes, okay, they do have families, but we cannot trust them. And Friends International has been working for 20 years on family reintegration, and sometimes. I've met some parents who have sent their kids to orphanages because they didn't have the $20 for school uniform. So we really need to work on strengthening families and communities. But the idea is to turn them into something else. It's a process, but that's the way to go, I guess.
Still, there is not any project that we can say that is working. There is any initiative we can have more information?
Of course, we can talk about that.
Perfect.
Yeah, no problem.
And especially in Rajasthan, in India, there's been a lot of work on alternative care as well for children who cannot be with a direct, immediate family. What does the kinship family look like? What do guardianship arrangements look like? And I do think, especially in Rajasthan, they're looking at foster care as well as a pilot to see what that looks like. But I would say also engaging in terms of working with the partner to say, why are these children here? And what kinds of support could you do to the local community, having it come from them? It doesn't need to be you saying, look, we need to do a cash transfer program, or we need to, but it may be, how do we work together to make sure that the children in this area have access to school? If you understand the reasons why the children are in the shelter to begin with, you can start to address the root causes as to why they've come. And I think even within, India is such a huge country, there's so many different reasons why children leave their family. To work with that partner to fully understand why is it that the children are coming in the first place, and then start to talk about what kinds of initiatives could you do that involve the entire community instead.
Could I have another question, please, from the floor? It's right at the back left-hand side of the gentleman there. Thanks.
Hi, question for Border Force and National Crime Agency. So the government have said, I think, that there's going to be 40% budget cuts in the Home Office in the next 5 years. I know that's hitting the police and the Border Force very hard. In the UK, we don't have physical exit checks. There was an attempt, I think, to bring in electronic exit checks. But to what extent are you concerned that you simply won't have the resources, either in the police or the Border Force, to be able to respond when somebody, you know, from the industry finds something suspicious on the way out of the country? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who'd like to go first on that one?
The economy and the challenges we're going to face around that. You know, the threat, the risk to the UK across the whole spectrum of everything we've been talking about today and more continues to rise. Planes and boats and trains become cheaper. People want to travel more, so there's an increased amount of that. And with less resources and less money to combat the criminality behind that, the challenge is there. But there's going to be a big investment into automation, making sure that low risk and low threat passengers can travel easier, faster, really embracing the digital age and making sure that people that don't pose us any harm and aren't doing anything at risk to children, make it a lot easier for them, a lot more automated, embrace that digital concept. But also take the opportunity, so the border in particular is this unique opportunity for one government, so National Crime Agency and Border Force and other people to work together and to recognise that inbound and outbound exist in other ways. And in fact, I've heard you, Tony, say the same thing. Your outbound is my inbound, something that I very much believe. And understanding how that outbound, inbound works, what the relationship is, make it easier for good people and low risk, make it harder for the criminals. So the challenge is absolutely there. But I think we're up for it.
Excellent.
I think from the National Crime Agency's point of view, we look very much to the fact that we have to work under the CSR review that's coming up. It's going to be challenging, as Ashley has said. We need to be more focused and intelligence-led. That continues to happen. But particularly, we're fortunate within CEOP that David Cameron made a pledge in relation to financial matters and granted us a 10 million additional funds. That's primarily around, obviously, what is happening on the internet, but particularly around travelling transnational child sex offenders. They particularly are now obviously using the internet to carry out their activities. So that's an advantage to us that we're actually got that financial backing to actually try and combat that. And a number of operations are taking place with regards to that type of offending.
Very much indeed. Do we have another final desperate question waiting to be asked? Yes. And it's the furthest distance between the two parts of the room, isn't it?
I'll try and talk louder.
No, it's okay. We're nearly there. We've got a very fit person running around with the microphone. There you go.
Hi, my question is, there's been a lot of focus on Asia and paedophiles, but there's also child protection issues closer to home. I work for a company called Worldwide Kids Company, and we run kids clubs and help set them up in hotels. And I found internationally, where you've got international guests in a hotel, there's often a shying away from any responsibility where there's a child protection issue that happens in a hotel specifically by the hoteliers who don't want to have anything to do with it. They don't want any bad press. So I'm not talking specifically about a UK national. Perhaps it might be a Russian or a French or Spanish, whichever family where there's clearly a child protection issue happened. What's your advice there on where to go to take the right course of action?
Would that would be in the UK, would it?
No.
Right.
No, I'm talking internationally, not in the UK.
Yeah.
I know.
As I said in my presentation, you've got to first look at the local law enforcement to let them know, because quite clearly the offence is taken if there's an offence occurring or suspicions around that activity. Those local police and local law enforcement need to know, and they need to act quickly, because if they're in the position that there's children within that hotel, the chances are that abuse is taking place, and the ability then is to actually seize evidence. That's another important factor, not only forensically, but also in relation to what I was saying around laptops and phones as well. That's the key issue, to actually get the locals involved straight away. What we have the ability to do within the National Crime Agency, particularly if it's UK nationals, is actually look at our ability to contact our international liaison officers and then assist the local force in relation to that investigation. Because it's key to us to actually say, we're here to assist you, to give you that support, okay, and actually hopefully get a judicial outcome. Because the more people, and as the gentleman said over there, the more people that are convicted and actually shown to be convicted, that's the important thing, to send out that message that this type of behaviour will not be tolerated and the courts will sentence them heavily.
Okay, I think the UK national perspective is very efficient, works very well internationally.
I think the difficulty
from
is, like
from a
you said,
local law enforcement perspective, they often take the view, oh, well, they're only here for a couple of weeks. They'll be gone back to their home country shortly, so we'll just take their name, and then nothing really happens about it. So from an international platform, where do you go?
Well, we've got to work very closely. That's what I'm saying in relation to our international liaison officers. We want to work very closely with our partners abroad in law enforcement. If we can get them to a position where they understand what we're doing and what we're trying to achieve around child sexual exploitation, that's important. And again, what Ashley was saying, we've just got to work in partnership with people and actually keep sending out the message that actually child sexual exploitation needs to be investigated. It needs to actually needs appropriate departments to deal with that, and specialists as well. But particularly what we want to do is actually say to people, you have got to do something about this. And that's all of us. As I was trying to say in the message, and so was Ashley, all of us has got to actually be involved in this. And that's why I particularly said, let us know. It might well be that we can pass on that information to our law enforcement colleagues abroad, because like I said, we've got an international wing to us as well. And maybe we can actually affect some change. I know it's difficult, and I fully appreciate that, especially when you're talking about, you know, people.
I just think on an international level, there's let's say a lack of system whereby you know the appropriate action is going to take place and something is going to be done about it.
I think, like you said, we're fortunate within the UK because we've got that ability, and some of the other agencies as well, along the sort of like the Americans, the Australians, all these sort of like areas that have the ability to contact local law enforcement. The difficulty comes is perhaps, like you were mentioning, people like sort of like Russia, and if it's children from Russia or whatever, that is very difficult. But I would hope that actually, as we engage more and more with foreign law enforcement, they understand now the problem that they have to. And there's specialist units now within Thailand, Philippines and elsewhere.
I think Harold has the final question or the final point.
A couple of comments and then a final question, if I may. I mean, it is very striking, the point that one of the speakers made, that we've seen a displacement of sexual exploitation of children because Cambodia has begun to deal with it. The problem is it's like burglar alarms. You just move it on. You just have to keep moving it on until eventually you reduce it. And it's a long struggle. That is clear. The second thing, maybe to raise our spirits, because I think we perhaps should, is that 4 years ago when we ran the first one of these, people were saying to me, Harold, it's not an issue. Everybody signed the code. We've come a long way in 4 years. We're not going to stop.
No.
I also run the program in Sao Paulo, Brazil, big issue. In South Africa, where people are struggling with quite a lot of problems in this area, and in Arabia. I wanted to take the last question to ask whether you have any advice for me about how I might get the issue raised in those countries, the kinds of people I might be approaching to put on a panel like this to talk about the issue in Latin America, in Africa, and in Arabia. Difficult last question, but important.
Well, certainly for us, we are fortunate within the National Crime Agency to have a footprint internationally, particularly around international liaison officers. So they are all being trained with regards to child sexual exploitation, because quite simply, beforehand there was a predominance to look at drugs and firearms as well. But now child sexual exploitation is so important, and it's such an important feature abroad as well. And all our international liaison officers are being trained with regards to what to look for with regards to CSE. So it's vital that actually one of the first ports of call should be our ILOs.
Thank you. Excellent. Anybody else like to contribute as well down the line?
Just have one thing.
Sure.
One of the important things, I think, is that plain English. So internationally, not being afraid to tackle what you might see as a taboo or a cultural subject, dealing with the subjects in plain English and realising that the people making money out of this are probably some of the worst criminals in the world, because to be successful at this, they are murderers and rapists and paedophiles, all into one unique, nasty sort of criminality. And using that plain English language, making it so simple for people to see what modern-day slavery looks like, hopefully everyone will find a common agenda.
Excellent. Anyone else like to make? No. So on your behalf,
can I just
go
I
on
want to
then,
say
Harold.
thank you to the panel. It is a particular privilege to have had the speakers we've had today. You've given up your time. We are going to use this tape extensively, and I have to say I'm going to be back in touch with all of you to take advice about who I might contact in those other countries, as we will roll this out across the agenda. But John, thank you.
No, that's fine. Ladies and gentlemen, on your behalf, can we thank our speakers? Thank you.